Welcome to the IODSA podcast, where we explore governance in action. My name is Vas, I'm an executive at the IODSA. Today, we're unpacking the evolution of governance and what King 5 means for boards navigating complexity, uncertainty, and increasing stakeholder expectations. Joining me is Sikkie Kajee, governance specialist and experienced director who has worked extensively in the governance and board leadership space. In this conversation, we'll explore what governance in practice really means as organizations transition from King 4 to King 5. Sikkie, thanks so much for joining us today. I wanted to get an understanding from you, why King 5? Why did we go from King 4 to King 5? And why is it important?
I think, look, firstly, King 5 is probably more a refinement of King 4 than a rewrite. You know, the transition from King 3 to King 4, that was big, it was fundamental, it was different. King 5 is just an iteration, a small evolutionary step. It simplifies it on one hand. It focuses the effort. So I think adoption of King 5 is going to be easier on one hand because it's not a fundamental rewrite. But at the same time, I think people are underestimating the disclosure requirements in King 5. I think that's the fundamental change from King 4 to King 5 is how we disclose, how we talk about it. From King 1 all the way through King 4, I think the disclosure was whatever you and your public relations team wanted to do. Now we've almost tried to standardize what you should be talking about in your disclosure of your application of King 5. And I think that is probably the part that people have underestimated in, call it the implementation. And as people start doing their new reports, I think you're going to find they're going to realize the changes and what it really means such.
So is the disclosure requirements now more a mindset change at the board, or is it a process change, or is it both?
I think primarily it's probably a mindset change. Up until King 4, you applied and you explained, and somebody might put a thesis in, and others might put a paragraph in. With King 5, I think the disclosure requirements are a little more specific. What are you not doing? And you need to be very targeted about, I do this differently. I do that as recommended. And I think that probably indicates to me more mindset change than process per se. But I think a lot of people have underestimated because it was so laissez-faire up to that point. You did it the way you wanted to, I did it the way I wanted to, and we could all shout from the rooftops, I applied King. Now you've got to demonstrate, which might not be, gone are the days where Steinhoff can say, we apply the King code, and then we find out, it was on paper, but not necessarily in practice.
Why is there a need for King 5 actually? What is it actually responding to?
I think you'll have to ask smarter people than me. I think, look, governance is dynamic. It's not static. It needs to respond to changes. And the various King codes have been responsive to change as we've moved along. Was it absolutely necessary? I suppose you could argue about that. But I think the change from 2016 to now is just responding to the subtle changes in our landscape. But that I think it also indicated there wasn't a need for a fundamental change. So it wasn't as big a rewrite as King 4 was. So yeah, to me, you could argue, is it necessary, is it not necessary? But I think it was responding to the continuous change. If governance becomes static, if it becomes like a piece of legislation that just stays in the same way, shape, or format for 15 or 20 years, that's when you start losing touch with what society needs and what business ultimately requires us to have.
Sikkie, what are the consequences of boards seeing the code as a voluntary code and maybe not all that important? So it's there, but maybe it's there if I need it or if I want to.
If we talk about voluntary versus, call it a statutory type thing, in common with a lot of other countries, we've adopted a voluntary approach, primarily because we already have laws that say thou shalt not steal, but every day in South Africa, somebody steals. We have laws that say thou shalt not kill, but every day somebody gets killed, right? So just having laws doesn't achieve your objective. I think a voluntary code like the King Code, especially with its proportionality, allowing large corporates to do it in a particular way, allowing SMEs to be proportional in what they do, but still being able to achieve the outcomes, the principles of King. It allows flexibility. The issue of voluntary versus mandatory, I think to a large extent, my experience with corporates, listed, unlisted, non-profits, everybody's trying to do it. I'm not so sure that it is totally voluntary. There's enough market pressure, whether it's from donors, whether it's from investors, for elements of King and the King Code to be implemented. I think that debate of mandatory versus voluntary is probably a moot point for most South African businesses. I think the problem is those that don't want to do the right thing. They are always looking for the excuse as to why King is not mandatory, King is not something I have to worry about, don't waste my time. But that, even somebody who is allegedly implementing could be doing that. But that's a people problem. That's not a governance code problem.
Right. And you briefly touched on the proportionality of King 5. Touch on outcomes-based governance. So we read this term outcomes-based governance. We hear this term outcomes-based governance. What does this actually mean?
So look, King 5 is very clear. We want ethical and effective leadership. We've had that since King 3, if not even King 2, but King 3 definitely had ethical and effective leadership. But the question, a lot of people are asking, so what? Why? And with King 4, we first brought in outcomes-based governance. So we wanted an ethical culture, we wanted good performance, we wanted prudent control or effective control, and legitimacy. I think the problem in how people have interpreted this, all four outcomes need to be there. There's a feeling sometimes amongst some people that we can prioritize, we can pick and choose. I'm going to go for performance, I'm not going to go so much for this type of thing. We need all four outcomes fundamentally. When we don't strive for all four, then you have the potential for problems. You know, if we take, and I take very facetious examples, the post office, we can have wonderful compliance, but zero performance and relevance. Or you could have Steinhoff, wonderful performance, zero compliance. It's still a problem. And I think it's not about a choice. You've got to get a balance between all four of those outcomes. Depending on the nature of your business, there may be more emphasis on one or the other, but we need to strive for all four outcomes. And I think that's where it's more, again, how we implement, how we prioritize that is the problem, rather than the way the code is written.
So I want to touch on something. You've kind of mentioned it in your answer now, and I think it's quite an important concept for people to grasp. King is built around this idea of integrated thinking, the integrated approach. Does that mindset and philosophy result in all outcomes being reached? Is it fair to say that? Or what is integrated thinking then?
Look, I think we've got to be honest with ourselves. In some respects, we are aspirational. When we think of stakeholder inclusivity, when we think about integrated thinking, when we think about all of those things, I think there's some aspirational thinking. Not everyone is there in terms of coming around to it. I think for some people it's almost like socialist thinking. But I think the reality, from a South African perspective, I don't make any representations about the rest of the world's governance. But from a South African point of view, we need to transform our society, our economy, etc. And we need to think in an inclusive way. We need to think in an integrated way. What we do here has impact somewhere else. And we need to appreciate and understand it as boards more often. We can't afford to put our heads in the sand anymore and say the business of business is business and everything else that happens around us is not our problem. We are part of society. We are part of the planet. We can't divorce ourselves from the world around us. It's just not. It's not rational anymore. We see it today. There are some countries who are trying to divorce themselves of what's happening around us. It's that is so early 20th century thinking. I think we've moved on. We can't afford to have. There's only one reason for business, and that's profit. That in South Africa, I think with King 2 and King 3, we started moving away from that kind of thinking already. When we started talking about people, planet, and profit. So I think, yeah. But I'm also old enough, mature enough to understand not everyone is there. Not everyone is on the same page at this stage. It's a process. It's a journey. It'll probably we'll reach that utopian state long after I have left this mortal earth, and that's fine with me. But we need to strive.
On the point of journey, at what point should organizations start considering King 5 and best practice? I know obviously there's certain requirements for certain organizations, depending if you're listed, the size, etc. But if we start a business today, at what point does corporate governance become applicable?
Look, I think corporate governance is applicable from the get-go. But the reality is, if you and I started a business today, when we have a problem, we might sit over a cup of coffee, discuss our options and possible solutions, go off and implement. When we talk corporate governance, effectively it's a combination of people, process, and structure. As our business gets bigger, we'll add more structure, we'll add different people, and we'll add more process. We'll start having formal agendas, minutes, meeting packs, and all of that. The fact that you and I have a meeting, discuss our options, it just might be less on the paperwork and process side, but it doesn't mean we're not doing. Good governance requires to think about options, think about issues beyond just our narrow problem. So I think corporate governance is necessary. It's just how much structure, what other people you need to bring in, all of that will develop and evolve over time. When our business gets into the growth phase, we need to bring people who can manage our growth. When it gets into the mature phase, we might be the wrong people to be in the business. As entrepreneurs, we might not be maintenance people. And when the business gets into decline, as all businesses eventually get into decline, you might need to bring the turnaround specialists in and not the people who were maintaining the business. So the type of people, the type of structures you use, the type of processes you use, all constantly respond to changes. And what you used 5 years, 10 years ago doesn't mean it's still necessary today. And what you use today might not be appropriate in 5 or 10 years from now. I think too often we try to be rigid about the way things are, and we don't actually, why do we do things? What do we want to achieve? And that's where outcomes-based and principle-based governance is useful, in that we think of what's the objective first, and then we backfill how we get there. It's a more appropriate way of thinking of something than to say, I've got to do this because I have to have this committee because of this, but it serves no useful purpose in terms of my outcomes that I want to achieve as such. Too often we create committees because somewhere somebody told us it's a good idea. If it doesn't add value, why are we doing it?
So that brings me to my next question. I wanted to ask you, in your experience, what are the barriers to corporate governance? We've spoken a little bit about structures, and then structures not being really fit for purpose. So what are the barriers to corporate governance? What are the boards challenged with in terms of implementing best practice?
I think that question might be very simple on the face of it, but I think there's so many dimensions to the problem. Firstly, traditionally there was almost this tick box approach to governance. It didn't help us. So that was probably one problem. 2, we have a people problem. What criteria are we actually using to identify and appoint people? In many respects, we've taken a very formulaic approach. I need so many males, so many females. I need the different race groups. I need so many accountants, so many engineers, so many doctors, so many lawyers. Are those the right criteria for the people in the boardroom? We want leaders. We want successful or people who've demonstrated good judgment, people who've achieved something. How do we measure this? And I think we've got one of the big challenges is we've chosen from a very narrow pool of people we know and people who know the people we know, as opposed to really opening it up to different things. Ultimately, one of the King principles asks us to have a diverse board, not diverse in terms of race and gender and age and qualifications and whatever have you. Ultimately, we want diversity in thinking at the end of the day. I think we actually don't want that in our boardrooms. We want people who think and talk like us. So I think that's another fundamental problem in the implementation of governance. From board appraisals that we've conducted over the last 10, 12 years, there's very common themes that come across. How the board is selected, what criteria are we using, what skills are missing from many boards. When we get to board meetings, the common refrain is always about the quality of the pack and the way meetings are managed. For some of us, we love the sound of our own voice, it seems. We want to repeat and hopefully that until people give up and agree with us because they don't want to hear us anymore. When we talk about the functions of typical responsibilities of a board, technology governance, I don't think we've really got our heads around what that means. I think the next big thing is the actual, everyone's talking about AI, but what about the ethical use of AI? I think that's going to become the big debate in the near future. Risk governance. Because we tend to almost think of risks in terms of operational risk terms as opposed to strategic risk terms. And I think those types of issues come in. When we look at boardroom dynamics, some people walk into boardrooms with the attitude that the executive team must be up to no good and I must catch them out. You start with, on that foot, it's a downhill journey from there on. There's no mutual trust, there's no respect, there's no mature relationship from the get-go. So all of these things are coming out in board appraisals, and it can be very sector specific, and we don't need to go into that today. But the issue is, it comes back to we've used the wrong criteria to populate these boards, and that's why we don't get value out of these boards. Some of the best boards I've worked with are in the so-called non-profit sector, where they don't get paid anything. But people are passionate about a particular mission and they give their time and you get great outcomes. But it's not, we somehow can't replicate that in either the corporate sector or the public sector, for that matter. We reduce the issues to arguments around fees and why can the non-profit sector that doesn't pay achieve good outcomes by and large?
Sikkie, for my final question, I wanted to ask you, what gives you optimism about the future of governance in corporates in South Africa?
There are enough people who are trying to leave the world better than they found it. I think especially if I look at the younger generations, there's a realization that previous generations may have done us a disservice in some respects, my generation included. But I think that I seem to see a lot more passion about how we protect and we do better and how we leave something better. And I think so long as those people prevail, that there's more people wanting to do the right thing, not just for the company, but for the people, the society, the planet, then we have a chance that we will leave the world better for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren as such. But I'm not naive enough to believe that there is still a big number of people who live for the here and now, want to have the bling and the fancy Lamborghinis or whatever. But we've got to have more people who do the right thing when nobody's watching than who want to live for the short-term prestige and image and what have you. So I'm the eternal optimist. I have faith in there's more of us that will want to do the right thing, and that's why I think we will eventually prevail. Ultimately, the issue of good governance comes down to people who want to do the right thing. If we want to tick boxes, it's easy enough to tick boxes, and then find, you think of Steinhoff, a 200 billion loss. It's not a small amount. Whether it's pensioners, whether it's employees, whether our whole society took that loss. The reality is, we all have to stand up and draw the line in the sand. We must also appreciate there's also people who don't want to do that. And we've got to isolate them and keep them out of our systems.
Sikkie, thanks so much for that. That was very insightful. That was a great conversation. I certainly learned a lot. One of the things that stood out for me was the people element in all of this and doing the right thing. I share your optimism, and
you're a much younger child than me, yes.
So thank you for your time, Sikkie.
You're welcome, Vas. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation with Sikkie Kajee. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our channel to receive alerts about future conversations. For those of you that would like to attend our King 5 Masterclass, head over to our website at www.iodsa.co.za and visit our training page.